Hiya, it is the Family Values Podcast. I'm Joe Woods.
I'm Tom Hicks.
So this is the first official episode. I hope you all like the demo. Very fun to do. I say it's a good laugh, but talking about the current state of politics in the UK is never a fucking good laugh. How did you feel about that, Tom?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair enough assessment. We've gone a little bit different this week. One of the reasons, I think, to give everyone a bit of a palate cleanser to sort of show there are still issues going on in the world that aren't Brexit and aren't about the Tory leadership.
Yeah, just because we could take the obvious route of just talking about Brexit every week. And for the first official episode, I really like to look at a very specific talking point, and I'd say kind of a semi-crisis going on in the south of England at the moment. For anyone who's not aware, we did discuss it in a demo, at least briefly. It is the issue of London councils, particularly the East London, Outer East London boroughs, moving their council tenants into outer boroughs and authorities outside London into the counties without making basically those authorities aware of their new tenants. And so today we kind of want to kick off the official start of the podcast by devoting an hour special to that. Let's give some background. So, Tom, you're from Waltham Forest. I'm from Waltham Forest. You now live in Redbridge. I'm still in Waltham Forest. What was your experience with council housing growing up in you're from Leytonstone? I mean, what seem to be the issues around you in regards to housing?
Well, personally, I hadn't had any direct contact with council housing, but in Waltham Forest there are quite a lot of council-run properties. There was a big tower block, which is right next to the Green Man Roundabout, which was there for years, which they demolished, which I think is a good a good metaphor for what a lot of London councils are doing, which is they are moving away from the traditional sort of block style to try and go more towards the private landlord route, but that's getting harder and harder with rents being just skyrocketing from London, and that's something that no one really knows what a lot to do about.
I mean, I know Leytonstone well, and I particularly know, all of Waltham Forest. I'm from the more sort of northern end, but Waltham Forest is a borough that for maybe 2 decades people have discussed the gentrification of, and it's finally happened within about the last 5 years. But Leytonstone, interestingly enough, it never really came to properly.
No, there's always been sort of 2 parts to Leytonstone, sort of the north and the south part of the tracks, as it were. Yeah. For the central line. The south part, which I'm more familiar with, or I suppose it's more the eastern part, is a little bit more upmarket. There's a lot less council tenants there. It's you're a lot less likely to be mugged. But if you go across the tracks, I have had several people who had those experiences, sort of moving up towards the ends of Leyton, as it were. As people call it, the Stratford end. Yeah. The Stratford end, the Cattle end in particular. The Cattle is. So for anyone who doesn't know the geography of Leytonstone, this part of East London, it's essentially one very long high road that stretches from the edge of Epping Forest at Whipps Cross Hospital, Border Woodford, and then a long road that stretches all the way through kind of urban Waltham Forest down to Stratford, the border with Newham. So you've at one end up at Whipps Cross, you've got quite a lot of wealth, particularly surrounding the lake. You've got what the area is called Whipps Cross. It's a very kind of, not classic, but kind of, I suppose, Art Deco era housing and really kind of beautiful housing. It's where there's specific areas originally where Alfred Hitchcock is from, where he grew up. You've got the Alfred Hitchcock Hotel. And then, as Tom said, you basically go further down and because you go across the Central Line tracks, you then probably come across some of the worst poverty in the borough. Yeah. And a lot of crime, a lot of violence, rival gangs that live in. A lot of stabbings happen around that area. It's if there's ever a stabbing in Leytonstone, it's normally around that area. Yeah. And to basically make this point as well with Leytonstone, particularly at that end, you have rival gangs that exist in council house estates. For anyone listening from the States, this would be housing projects. We call them council estates here. Basically, these are developments with apartments or flats on top of each other that is made up of state housing.
And there's a problem within London where gangs over the last 30 to 40 years have spawned on these estates. They've become territorial over drug running, sort of drug dealing territory. And so on Leytonstone High Street, you can have a gang from one all at Cat Hall, a gang at the other end at, what the hell's the name of the other estate, Beaumont. And, I mean, you know, okay, I'm not going to pretend that I know the ins and outs of what's gone on between those two gangs, but let's say people end up dead, people end up, you know, severely injured, you know, there's gunfire, there's stabbings, there's all that kind of, you know, good gang-related stuff. And it can never be a particularly pleasant place, Leytonstone.
No. It's gotten a lot worse in the last 20 years or so for a number of reasons, I would say. But I would say something that doesn't get talked a lot about, particularly for that area of Leytonstone, is the fact that high street that Joe mentioned used to be one of the main roads from outer London into in London, at least at this part of the area, and that got replaced about 15 years ago by I can't remember
the new road,
as people still call it around
here.
here.
People still refer to it as New Road, even though it's existed before I was born. I think it was built about 5 years before I was born.
Yeah,
but it's now what's referred to as the A13, which goes from Southend out on the coast to the middle of London, and so Leytonstone Leytonstone High Road kind of lost its importance, and it became very dilapidated, for lack of a better term.
When my parents first moved into the area in the early 90s, there was a lot more pubs around the area, and of course there's demographic changes which resulted in that as well. But I think the reduction of traffic on that road has also contributed to that.
Bring this up to today, and why specifically we're chatting about Leytonstone is because Leytonstone, again, which is in Waltham Forest, which is one of these East London councils, and a place we both know very well, is where we grew up. Leytonstone, for most of it, is very rough, and then you've got the small part in the north, particularly north of the High Road, which is relatively prosperous, but it's the new night, what they call the Leytonstone nightlife, is literally based on a couple of bars and pubs that change owners every few years.
Yep, pretty much.
And on those few bars and pubs, Waltham Forest Council has always kind of wished for this boom in kind of regeneration in Leytonstone, but it's just never quite happened. Particularly because when you get past that part of the High Road, most of the housing that back on to the east side of the High Road tends to be council. You have a lot of estates that stretch for a long way down. As we said, Cat Hall, Beaumont, some others escape me. Excuse me. But Wanstead Park, I suppose, is technically Forest Gate, but it's still within that area. And the Harrow Estate as well. Leytonstone is basically one of those prime areas where a borough like Waltham Forest would be looking to just grab as many tenants as they can and push them out into cheaper accommodation out into Essex or name a county out east, and then basically sell off the council housing for prime real estate to developers, because particularly what we call the housing associations, which are essentially the semi-private arm of London boroughs, they effectively, there's a lot of greasing of palms at the moment. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, and this has gone on. I would like to say it happened, not I'd like to, but it seems something that naturally happened under the Conservative government, but reality stretches back further than that. It probably stretches back towards the end of the Labour administration. And it doesn't make a difference anyway, because most of these boroughs are all Labour boroughs.
Yeah, I was going to say, it does seem to be something that crosses party lines of the wantum of to eventually get a borough, to get a sort of almost like Hackney is now, where it's becoming a lot more, it is almost basically gentrified in a way. That is the sort of model that a lot of East London boroughs, particularly Waltham Forest, would like to move towards. And you can see that walking down Walthamstow High Street with the sort of new Art Deco things that they're always trying to push, and we're actually this hipster hub, as it were, which is my idea of a carbon copy of what Hackney has been in the last decade.
I mean, that's it. Every East London borough that is looking for that kind of gentrification, everything's specifically based on the model that Hackney. You can't. But the problem is, local government and the local state cannot perpetuate and cannot create gentrification.
No.
It's about market forces.
Yeah, I think the best example of that bit with Hackney is, if you don't know Hackney, it's got Shoreditch in it, which I think is a name which most people effectively of sort of under 30 know where that is, because it's got a very good nightlife.
Well, if you're over 40 in London, you know Shoreditch has been rough, because back when you were a kid, Shoreditch was basically no man's land. It was a shithole. It's basically where my grandparents grew up. It was a dump.
It was proper old East End sort of around there, wasn't it? When that part of the area was considered just the East End of London.
It was the East, I mean, this was basically East London, or what we now call the East End, which is traditional East London. The East End is not considered, in contrast to what a lot of people say, the East End does not consist of the outer East London boroughs, so Waltham Forest, Newham, Barking and Dagenham. They're not part of the East End, they're East London. East End is the traditional East London, so this is the area that was part of London, or the east of London, before 1965, before the Greater London Act. So everyone's trying to base this, all the East London boroughs are trying to base this gentrification on sort of the Hackney model. The only two boroughs that have kind of reaped off of that, I suppose, is Waltham Forest and Tower Hamlets. Tower Hamlets, that was just going to happen naturally. Waltham Forest, I suppose, because it had cheaper accommodation, but also had access away from being relatively urban and very good access to the centre of London via transport. It also had a lot of greenery. Has a lot of greenery. It hasn't gone anywhere. But a lot of people like to use Waltham Forest kind of green side in a kind of selling point.
Yeah, I think it works quite well, because there are many different... I mean, it's right on the edge of Epping Forest, which used to be, this entire area was Epping Forest.
Can I just make this point? It sounds a bit shitty, but for someone who grew up in Waltham Forest now, walking through Walthamstow, you see this big slogan, or big kind of... I suppose it's like a tagline saying, "The Forest," or "Welcome to the Forest." Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what shitty fucking marketing firm Waltham Forest basically paid for that, but no one from Waltham Forest has ever called Waltham Forest the Forest. Yeah. Do you know why that is? Because barely anyone from Waltham Forest, unless you're from like the top half or quarter of Chingford, actually has any access or any contact with Epping Forest. Yeah. Even that little bit of Epping Forest we were talking about around Leytonstone is a very isolated from the main bulk of Epping Forest. Yeah. It's surrounded by urban development.
Most people refer to that as the flats. More than that.
This is modern London, so all these kind of new hipsters that are being kind of attracted into Waltham Forest because of Epping Forest, I find hilarious. So they all move into Walthamstow. Walthamstow is as urbanly developed as any part in the city, despite being in the suburbs. Yeah. There is barely any stretch of forest in it. If you want main bulk hiking Epping Forest, you have to go to the furthest northern extremities of the borough. You have to go to North Chingford, the end of Station Road, which is the border between London and Essex. It's hilarious. The point being, it's this that basically creates these circumstances where a borough like Waltham Forest would like to get rid of their tenants. They'd love to push them out to cheaper accommodation, get rid of the problems, sell off their housing to their quote-unquote private arms, the housing associations.
I mean, there's that angle from the financial perspective and the sort of future perspective, but there's also more the short-term aim of reducing the amount of people that are in council housing and the people that are on the homelessness register. Yes. As it is now.
You picked up on this a bit earlier before we started recording. Do explain the homelessness list a bit more.
Okay, so at the moment there's effectively two situations where they're trying to move people out who are already in council accommodation, or people who are on waiting lists, which are known as homelessness lists because they're sofa surfing. They don't actually have a permanent residence, not even a council residence. Now, if you're a worker in the council and your job is to reduce that amount, the amount of people on that list, then you can either get those people homes or you can make it seem like they have rejected all possible alternatives that you have provided to them. And this is where we are going to get into a bit more detail here, but this is where you see them these councils offering them places which they know they're not actually going to accept, such as in Essex or even as far as Birmingham, and I think I saw one in Telford, which is a 3 hours drive away.
Isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's right outside of
I don't even
Shropshire.
consider that the Midlands. That's the fucking West Country.
Yeah.
To me, that's the border of Wales.
Yeah. It's West Country is sort of more down south, but
Yeah. It's got the same
worth
accent and the same culture, you know what I mean? It's all about apples and cider and pigs and, you know.
Yeah. That's why you've got these two issues where they're effectively saying, well, we can take them off the register because they are now intentionally homeless, which classifies somebody as some person who's like a recluse or a hermit who chooses to be on the streets, where these people don't want to be on the streets.
These people have contacted the authorities. They need help.
Yeah.
What part, I don't care what part of the political divide you're on. If you're fucking absolute no state libertarian / anarchist, because I see most like American style libertarians as anarchists, you have to sympathise with that.
Yeah.
These are people that are asking for help.
Yeah, they're going through the system. Yeah. They're not people who are
They're doing what you are supposed to do
if
you have, instead of falling through the cracks.
Exactly. And by offering these homes which they know they're not going to accept, it's just a way of reducing the amount of lists so they can go to their manager and say, look how great I am, I've reduced the amount of people on the list. And it's not actually helping somebody like a council is supposed to do.
I couldn't seem to find any statistics on this earlier, but is there any statistics to anyone on the homeless list as to how many people actually accept these properties?
It's less than 50%.
Less than 50%.
Of the people that are offered outside. I only saw demonstrations from 2 councils, from Newham and Brent, which is the Guardian article that I read earlier. Yeah. But that seems to be pretty consistent over the course of these councils.
For anyone who's not really that familiar with London, that's actually a very good comparison comparing Newham with Brent, because Newham and Brent are actually very similar areas, except one's in East London, one's in West London. They're both these kind of, really they're outer London boroughs, but they're very urbanly developed and they're very dilapidated. They're suburbs that have been kind of consumed into the London urban sprawl, and they don't kind of border on the rural areas anymore, and you know, there's no greenery. They're very much suburbs where urban development and planning has gone wrong. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of kind of deprivation, and during the 60s, the local authorities absolutely rammed the boroughs with these sky-high 60s style rat run estates. And I mean, these things are tower blocks. These are like 20-story tower blocks, not dissimilar to the Grenfell Tower you would have seen tragically go up in flames a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I mean, those first tower blocks make Grenfell look architecturally pretty, as it were. I mean, it is an extremely sad coincidence that during the time of probably the worst architecture in human history, they also built all these tower blocks.
I've got some kind of pseudo-communist friends of mine who basically, we were going past, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but on the A13, going out through Canning Town, going into London, there's this 60s real brutalist style architecture sort of estate, and it's one giant kind of weird beige damp looking tower block. It's really fucking
going down
high.
to the Blackwall Tunnel.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
And then it's got this weird elevator building that is completely separate from the building and has a walkway across each. What the fuck is that about?
It looks like somebody was literally on LSD when they were designing it. It is awful.
It's like if you could have got Kubrick, like Clockwork era to fucking design a building, a place for people to live. What the fuck was that era about in terms of, I mean, look, say we want about council housing, it looks better now.
It does, yeah. It looks a lot better now. They've got nicer sort of red brick things, which, at least on the surface of it, you wouldn't have imagined are council estates, because I think a lot of people in the UK have this vision of those extremely ugly tower blocks.
Oh my God. And London's not unique to that. You have Manchester, you have Birmingham, and the cities of the northeast, which probably have it the worst, places like Newcastle, Hull. Hull is a notorious one for the amount of these 60s estate blocks. They're fucking grim. They're really not a pleasant place to live, and they breed a lot of social issues. When you've got that many people who are in a desperate situation living on top of each other, it breeds problems.
Yeah, it's a very similar thing, as you were saying earlier, to the projects in New York and in Baltimore, where you have these high-rises, they're nowhere near as tall as the high-rises in America, but you have the sort of territorial issues with gangs, because once you've got once you've secured a tower block, it's very difficult for the police to go in there and take the drugs and to actually get it out.
Yeah.
So you've basically got a monopoly on that tower block for all different types of drugs. You can sell anything you want once you've got the tower block.
I think I forgot to make the point, but the fact that my pseudo-communist friends I was talking about, the point I was making, the fact they said they liked these tower blocks. I mean, I can't... If anyone listening to this who doesn't recognise this building we're talking about on the A13 in Canning Town, Canning Town's a very, very rough part of Newham. Very rough part, dilapidated, old industry, all kind of died out in the early 20th century. A lot of people were still dying well into the second half of the 20th century of cholera. So, yeah, it's a hole. But the point being, just write Canning Town tower block or brutalist tower block into Google Images and you'll see what I mean. It's I would say it's like something out of Soviet Belarus, but I think it's actually worse.
Yeah.
And Southern Newham particularly is just filled with that shit. Stuff that really, it should come down to where those people go, and then that'd give Newham again just to shove even more people out into the sticks.
Exactly, and this is the thing about this situation is I don't agree with what the councils are doing, but I do sympathise that there is an issue because you do need to find homes for these people, as it were. But the way that they're going about it is sort of not my problem anymore.
I don't have a problem with having to approach this issue with a new set of eyes, looking at somewhere like the Borough of Thurrock in Essex and saying, we have to now bring this into London fold, whether that be officially as a London borough or as now building new developments in Thurrock with new infrastructure and new ways of contact into London. I have nothing against that as long as you're transparent about it. And that now brings us on to the fact, fun enough, between Newham and Thurrock. Newham has actually, it's been causing some problems with a few of the Essex boroughs. Thurrock, Brentwood, Southend, and I think we were just reading Harlow as well, actually.
Yes, they had all signed a letter at the end of 2018 trying to highlight this issue and basically saying in one united voice, we're not happy about this and you need to reply, because so far the London boroughs haven't really given an official response apart from sort of platitudes and cliches about having to help people with housing issues. They've not actually addressed the specific issues that these Essex councillors have made. So I think we're going to get into a little bit more of the details in regards to particular controversies.
I mean, so Newham in particular has been buying up a load of property in Thurrock, particularly around the town of Grays, particularly around, I think specifically Grays, maybe Tilbury as well, and Thurrock itself, has been buying up property, and this has been the kind of archetypal issue with this crisis is Newham have just been moving their council tenants into these areas, into this cheap, substandard housing, because a lot of this is 1960s housing that really isn't built for big families.
No.
And they're essentially not letting the local councils, Thurrock, know. I know it's been happening in Brentwood. I know it's been happening in, I think, is it Castle Point as well? Essentially, we know why that is. It's because Newham are afraid if they tell they tell Brentwood, they tell Thurrock that they're sending more families, they will resist it.
Yeah, which should tell them something about how whatever policy is not a very good idea in the first place. But, they're sort of almost implicitly admitting that they know they're not doing something right by not being open and transparent about it.
So around 2 years ago now, I've been trying to find information how this has been going. As far as I know, it's still ongoing, so we can't talk about it that much because I can't find anything being resolved, and I imagine this will be a case that goes on for years. A few of those boroughs have taken, not to name any of the boroughs, some East London boroughs to court, or at least are trying to take them through further legal action at the moment over this issue. I think some individual Essex boroughs have had their own cases against individual London boroughs. But as far as I know, the last legal movement was by a group of Essex boroughs taking on a group of East London boroughs. I think they are named online. I don't want to. They're named if you go and search out any kind of articles in relation to it. The Thurrock Gazette is a good. The Thurrock Gazette is a good place to check that out. So obviously that's a giveaway there. One of the boroughs is taking these London boroughs to the Courtiers Gazette is Thurrock. Sorry, which okay, I've just given that away, but there you go. Go and search it out. It's a really interesting read. I don't want to name any of those boroughs just because I just don't want to get in any trouble. And honestly, if anyone picks this up and says, "Oh no, this is over," or "This is still ongoing," you're swayed.
Contempt in court.
Yes, exactly. Contempt in court, and we were absolutely frying Uncle Laxley Lennon the other week. Good old Uncle Tommy. So we were absolutely panning him for knowingly taking part in contempt of court. So not to name anyone, but that case is, as far as I know, still going on. Won't name anyone involved in it because I don't know. In all honesty, I can't remember at this point. And I don't. The point being, there needs to be a way forward without dumping people. And I mean, to be fair, supposedly a arm of Newham Council, which would be one of the housing associations, has effectively just in the last year or so has put out plans to build a new housing estate in Thurrock. I think in the town of Grays. It's in Grays, and I know there's been a lot of resistance to that. Everyone's basically been saying, well, this is just Newham under the guise of a housing association.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that is the case, then what I mean, there should be there might even be falling foul of competition law there, because being a sort of giving state aid to something which is effective, which should be a private market property, is generally thought of under both UK and I believe EU law. It's supposed to be private market. So if they're just going around buying all the things, what's to stop every other council basically owning half the land outside of outer London Ring?
Yeah.
I mean, and it would just be a case of them just shoving more and more people into that.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is going to end up for anyone, particularly as one of the main concerns for the communities in Essex that are being affected by this is that a lot of these people still have a job in London and they still have their families in London, so they're still based in London for all intents and purposes, except the fact they actually live.
Because let's get away from the stereotype, just so we can discuss this properly. Of everyone in council housing is unemployed, and we all naturally kind of go to that in our head. But the reality is, there's going to be a lot of people who are in lower paid employment.
I would imagine that being completely unemployed would sort of put you down pretty far down on the list at the moment for any council housing.
Well, last thing I read, there were certain boroughs who were shipping out unemployed people out into Essex just because they gave it as a reason. You've got no excuse to want to be near London. You haven't got a job. You don't want to. You can go. You can go out to Essex. You can go to Northampton. You can go and get a job out there. So you've got no reason to be tied to London. And that, when this really broke around 4 years ago, that was a big reason. When people were complaining about this, that was always the reason given. These people do not have jobs. You can go out to Northampton. You can go out to wherever we ship you to. I remember actually hearing on LBC once. This is probably about 5 or 4 years ago, when this was a talking point. When it was fresh, this issue. I remember hearing a young woman with her kids who had been sent from, I think it was Newham, to somewhere outside of Birmingham, so somewhere in the West Midlands. I don't want to say it was Birmingham, but it was definitely in the West Midlands. And she had said, you know what, I love it. They've moved me out here, I've got a better life, I've now got a job.
Okay.
Good for her. I don't know whether that was someone from Newham Council actually just calling in, trying to defend. And, but if that's the case, fair enough. But I'm guessing the majority of people in this situation do not want to be shipped out to, by the way, these pretty economically deprived and depressed parts of the country where they're going to find even less work. Yeah,
and they're gonna be less paid for their work as well. The cost of living is probably more less, so that it'll be beneficial. But at the same time, especially for these people who maybe they haven't been in the country for that long, they might have actually just come here and couldn't find social housing. They may or may not be British citizens, but if they're being taken away from their community, then they're going to not have the same support structures, and that's going to lead people down a dark road where they're not going to feel like they're actually part of any community. They're not part of the community within London that they've been kicked out of, or they're not really part of the community that they've been moved to.
I mean, that joint letter you were talking about from, was it last year?
To 2018 December.
Yes, so which these Essex councils put together, along with the Essex Police Service and the Fire Service. They signed this letter and sent it out to the GLA, the Great London Authority, basically making the point that you're cutting off these people from London who are from these communities, whether you're talking about the traditional London communities or you're talking about the individual cultural communities across London. As you probably know, there's hundreds. You know, whether it be the large Pakistani community, the Indian community, the Jamaican community, you're moving these people away from their support structures. And I think we discussed this when we briefly went into this issue on a demo episode. There seems to be, as much as I don't really want to press onto kind of an ethnic breakdown, there is a bit of a weird thing here where essentially there's a pushing in two directions as to where these councils, going on ethnicity or cultural background, are sending their tenants. There seems to be a bit of a thing where people from a white background are being sent to the East Midlands. They seem to be sent to particularly Northamptonshire, Cambridgeshire. You have people from the West Indian backgrounds to be all being sent to the West Midlands, to be sent to Birmingham. And then you have people from African backgrounds, which are very much being sent specifically to the North Banks of the Thames in Essex, Thurrock and Southend. And what the fuck is this? Why is there an ethnic breakdown?
That seems, it can't be randomised, as it were, because you would expect there just to be a completely mix of everyone going on, for this not to be an issue. But if it is that, I mean, I'm only speculating here, but there could be the sort of academic definition of multiculturalism might come into play here, where the idea of putting people within communities within the wider community rather than having a melting pot mentality, which is what a lot of people think of when they think of multiculturalism, particularly in the States. That's what America is proud of, having that sort of bring us your huddled masses and
these groups of people, particularly traditionally, who settled in the States, who basically mixed up the gene pool, so to speak.
Yes.
And people retain their own cultures. I mean, people to this day who have been there for generations still refer to themselves by their own ethnic backgrounds, even though they could be there for 5, 6, 7 generations. Which I don't think is too healthy, in my opinion, to be honest. You're Americans at that point. But point being, there's a melting pot thing.
Yeah, you're Americans first, as opposed to being actual. I am an African who happens to live in America. You're an African American, as it were.
Where I suppose similar to New York, London and LA. London is a huge world metropolis, which is very transient, and you have large groups of different ethnicities and cultures which move to London. Naturally, they gravitate towards London, but obviously they end up becoming part of a wider culture as opposed to settling into a mixed kind of a mixed experience, a mixed cultural experience. That's not completely true for everyone. There are boroughs where it is generally more mixed, and where people generally live amongst each other. But then there are boroughs which are generally, this is their area and that group's area, and this is where they live. For example, if anyone goes to what you'd call the Green Lanes area of Newham, and it goes far beyond just a specific Green Lanes road, what you'd say South Forest Gate and West Ham, going through to East Ham, you have an area that's very specifically Pakistani.
Yes, I mean, I've got a little bit of an anecdote for this, because I was actually on Green Lane this week.
All right.
And I was walking down it, and I had seen something which I had never seen before, which was actual Pakistani flags being flown outside of a lot of shops.
Yeah.
And my first thought was this was a bit late for the Cricket World Cup, but then I had a bit more of a think about it, and I was like, I think I know what this is about. It's because of the tensions in Kashmir right now.
Right.
So I think they're sort of waving their flag as to sort of say we support our our brothers back home, in a way that, as I say, I'd walk down Green Lane during the Cricket World Cup, which that local community was very excited about, and you didn't see that expression of nationalism and patriotism during the World Cup, but you do see it now, which I think does indicate how the people in that area do see themselves as being very much still Pakistani at heart rather than being British. First.
And to be fair, whether you see that as a failure of that community or a failure of local government to basically, kind of, and I suppose this is a bit of a freedom issue because obviously these are not all council house tenants. These are not all council tenants. So you can't try and disperse everyone, but at the same time try and encourage a more mixed and, dispersing of one community. But this is going back to the point we're making, which is people living amongst each other in their own communities. So certain boroughs seem to be breaking down these separate communities and moving them to places that maybe they feel these communities
would be better suited to.
Or
maybe even trying to create their own sort of baselines for a community of people that had been moved out from that borough.
I mean, what is that though? I mean, is that councils believing that these groups, if they were still to move them from their borough to a new borough together, they wouldn't get on? What is that about?
I think that, as I say, the sort of academic theory of multiculturalism does have that at its heart, is that you do need people that are more like you within a community, so that there's not so much tensions, as it were. Something I fundamentally disagree with. As long as you believe that you're British or American or what the actual nation that you're in, that's way more important. But that does seem to be the mentality of particularly people that work within governments, and which is a worrying thing, because once you have one ideology that permeates in government, particularly in unelected positions, then that can really bring the hammer down on places which can be very hard to reverse, because how do you get rid of people that work in the councils that aren't actually elected? How can you stop people from acting in that sort of way, as opposed to actually, apart from it?
I think that's because this is the issue. We're not talking about elected local councillors. We are talking about civil servants within town halls, within borough HQs.
Yeah. I can't imagine anyone getting elected on a platform. I'm going to move people out of the borough. that would not fly.
I can imagine some Essex boroughs where that might happen. I can seriously imagine maybe up north or somewhere down in Kent. We're going to move this group out. I'll vote for you. Not
in London. No one's
not in London. No, it's not a vote winner.
No.
Social cleansing is not a vote winner in London. It just seems to happen. And, obviously it's down to money, but, I mean, and that obviously goes to the resource issue. Yes, we know these London boroughs are stretched for resources. Funny enough, using Waltham Forest and Newham together, so the borough where me and Tom are from, Waltham Forest, and then Newham next door, they're two neighbours. Most people like to compare them because they're next door. They like to see them as effectively the same place, which is absolutely not true. No. You need to know the difference between the two boroughs. Waltham Forest, despite having been very urbanly developed, very highly urbanly developed, and having issues with crime and with poverty, Waltham Forest actually has one of the worst gang issues in London. Quite a high murder rate. It does have at least half the borough, which is, it gradually becomes more urbanly dispersed and suburban. And it has more greenery. It has a bit more, let's say, space to breathe. The further north you go, particularly in the north extremity, so let's say that the top quarter of the borough, it's definitely like less council housing, more kind of wealth, commuter wealth. You've got these beautiful kind of Tudor historical sites. You have the Queen Elizabeth Hunting Lodge, which literally lays right on the border between Essex and London, and the Waltham Forest, the London Borough of Waltham Forest and the Essex Borough of Epping Forest. Newham's a very different place. Waltham Forest has some, it basically has some tax base. Newham doesn't have that.
No.
Until, for anyone who doesn't know, Newham was the home of the London Olympics in 2012. It is where the London Olympic Park is. Until the Westfield Centre was opened there, Newham had no tax base. It had no pool to pull taxes from. it's a pretty desperately poor place, particularly for the UK and for London.
It was the sort of most centralised, subsidised borough in the country for a long time. I don't think it is. Is it still number one? Or
it wouldn't surprise me if it still is, just because things still seem pretty desperate there.
Yes, there's some areas, particularly towards the south, when you go more towards the river, that
as in like Canning Town we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, it's one of those areas where you sort of it's not, because it's so close, particularly the south, to Canary Wharf, where is the financial hub of the country, and some would argue financial hub of Europe.
Yeah.
But it can seem strange that such a poor area is right next to it. But that is the inevitable reality of that. And it's very hard to move money from that area to the hands of the people that need it.
So if you were to stand in Canning Town and stand by the river, I don't know how you get by the river, because it seems to be impossible to get by the river in Canning Town. You'd have to break into some kind of industrial land and have a Rottweiler set on you. Point being, you could go and stand there and look at Canary Wharf literally over the both the pedestrian and car bridge from you. But it's in a new borough, it's in Tower Hamlets. And again, Tower Hamlets has a similar thing to Waltham Forest, where it has a lot of issues, but at the same time it has a very high receiving tax base. Obviously, Tower Hamlets has a much higher earning tax base than Waltham Forest, because it actually earns from Tower Hamlet, from Canary Wharf, from the parts of the city, of the London financial sector that falls just into it. Newham is a pretty desperately poor place. Yeah. I would say it's probably on par with some places in the upper end of Eastern Europe, or from Portugal or Greece. It's a poor place.
It is. And I think bringing this sort of back to the issue of moving people out from Newham, is that it can seem sometimes a bit of a head scratcher, where they're more concentrating on moving people out than actually helping the people that are in there within their own sort of environment.
Because resources are scarce. Yeah. They don't have the base for it. They don't have the tax base. And the problem is, when you're moving these people to a new borough, particularly out in Essex, where you're moving them to cheaper accommodation, the problem is you're moving somewhere like Thurrock. Thurrock is pretty damn poor. You're moving there to somewhere where you don't have to deal with them on an economic level, but at the same time, you're not warning the administration in Thurrock. And Thurrock are not part of London. They don't have the same pull on business taxation. Yeah. Mainly,
they have even less resources.
They have less resources.
They have it's cheaper to operate there. Yeah. But the fact is, they don't get the funding that Newham gets. So they're effectively putting the cost from Newham onto Newham. Someone still has to pay for these people.
Yeah. So the boroughs of Essex, even the poorest ones, don't get quite this emergency funding quite like anywhere in London does. And Thurrock's not a rich place. It's probably got a higher per capita head of people doing better, who are better off in Thurrock than in Newham, but they haven't exactly got a wealth of resources. Most of their tax base probably comes from the Lakeside Shopping Centre. Yeah. So in reality, resources have got to be scarce there. Yeah. I mean, there aren't going to be the hospitals to deal with this. There are not going to be the GP services. There are not going to be job offices, or what's the word I'm looking for? Job centres. To deal who have the time to deal with this many new claimants.
Yeah, and with resources, there becomes the question of funding, but there also becomes the question of financial management and prudence on that regard. And it's a bit of a tangent, but I think it is related. There was something released this week about how Newham is the first council to be suing Barclays, who because Newham claimed they had been missold some loans, effectively, where the loans are now the interest rates have been really hiked up, and they thought they were going to get really cheap deals. And Barclays, along with other banks, still have these loans, despite the government actually making these loans now effectively illegal. Yeah. The loans that were still in place, similar to PFIs, are still there because you can't just retroactively go and reverse them.
Yeah.
So I think that the problem is that sort of almost a buyer beware sort of thing. It's like, why did you not have accountants and lawyers looking over these loan deals to make sure that you were getting a good deal? And now they're probably paid tens of thousands, like if not hundreds of thousands of pounds in interest fees and bank charges for these loans, which could have gone on actual spending resources for the people that live there. And what did they need these loans for at the time? And surely there must be some other way to actually operate it. I mean, a lot of our institutions aren't even allowed to operate loans. I know schools and academies definitely aren't allowed to take out loans. But that's another thing that needs to be addressed, within councils.
Wow. I wasn't even aware of that. When was this? Was this last week?
It was last week when I saw, I can't remember what paper it was in, but I saw an article about it. And they reckon that this will not be the last ones, because loads of councils, not just London councils, but councils across the country, took out these loans.
Doing this via a separate arm? Are they doing it directly via the council, or do you know this? Or?
I'm not too sure, but I do know that it is the councils that are taking Barclays to court about this.
Wow.
Because they're claiming that they were completely missold these loans. Now, that could be the case, and that means my point I made earlier about prudence would obviously be wrong, because you can't know if they're going to be defrauding you. But it is the case that the courts side for banks, which they generally do, it's sort of like, why did you do this? And it almost sounds like they're gearing up for a court loss so they can go in and claim that the institutions of the courts are all against them, instead of actually being more financially prudent when you take out these loans.
Wow, I mean, this is an example, particularly a borough like Newham, of the kind of the absolute incompetence that is just going on, bad decision making that is going on in these boroughs and these councils. It's ridiculous. I mean, we have to think these are councils that have to think about the future. They have to think about, how do we develop and make life better for our tenants and the people who live here, as opposed to just fucking shipping them out.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you expecting? Are you expecting a new influx of high taxpayers? And
I think that's a lot of what they're sort of gambling on, that the people that will get replaced with people that are actually net contributors, and that they'll, particularly with council houses, because if they can, particularly this is one of the reasons I think that councils do want more property being built, and I feel that as being a win-win, is that they're the ones who directly benefit from the council tax that these properties will have to pay, and if they're in a higher band, then the more money they're going to generate from it.
Just to go off of Newham and touch on a neighbouring borough of both Newham and Waltham Forest we were talking about earlier, that seem to be doing things correctly, it's Hackney. So Hackney, as you mentioned earlier, is the first borough of East London you come to when you go northeast from the city. It's dealt with gentrification for a long time now, maybe as much as 30 years.
It's been getting there for a while, and as we said earlier, is a sort of prototype for a lot of these boroughs.
And so basically Hackney is the prototype borough. If you're from East London, Hackney's a prototype. If you're a North London borough, either Islington or Camden are the kind of prototype for these sort of gentrificated boroughs, gentrification of inner London boroughs. And Hackney seem to be doing this, did the same thing, away from just forcing tenants to move out into the sticks. He seems to be doing it voluntarily with consent from the tenants, and they seem to do it transparently. So if you go online and you write, I basically just found this by writing into Google, East London boroughs dump tenants in Essex. I found Hackney were actually advertising to their council tenants that they have about 3 or 4 different schemes to help basically move Hackney tenants out of Hackney, but at least with their consent. So basically you've got the first scheme, which is a scheme to help move Hackney council tenants to the outer London boroughs. I don't know what that would solve. It would just push more people into Newham and Waltham Forest and Barking and Dagenham, whatever. But that is, at least it's voluntary. The next one, you've then got what they call the Fresh Start scheme, which is a voluntary scheme to basically downsize your council place as a Hackney tenant and then be moved, I think, into a private rented property outside of London. Where it is, I don't know. Obviously, I'm guessing there's a list of places you could move to. The next scheme is called Countryside and Seaside, and that is where specifically you can, again, do the same thing with the scheme I've just mentioned, which is you can basically downsize your place and move to a private rented property outside of London, but specifically this is for the seaside and the countryside, and for that you have to be over 60, which is an interesting cut-off.
I think it's I really like that idea because
I do,
it's because a lot of people I'm sure you've at least heard your parents talking about this, of whether they want to retire and live in London, and whether they want to move out to the country, as a lot of people do. But unfortunately, it is inevitably reality that there's going to be a lot of people who have been in council accommodations, who have been on minimum wage jobs or a little bit above minimum wage jobs for their entire life, and just do not have the means to do that.
So if you've got the chance to be moved via, the same housing benefit scheme you're on, but maybe cheaper for that that new council, just to be moved of your accord and with help from your council. It doesn't even necessarily have to involve the new council you're moving to, away from just pension payments, which would that involve them? I'm not certain it would.
No, the councils don't get pension payments.
Not in terms of state pensions, no.
No, that's DUP.
DUP, exactly. So
DWP, not DUP. Poor DUP, I didn't know about that.
We will be giving all over 60s a new payment if they agree to castigate the homosexual community. But the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions, so they would involve them. It wouldn't involve then this tenant's new council.
They would still have to pay the social services costs if they were ever moved into a care home, though, because the way it works, and I do actually know a little bit about this through my work, the way that care homes are paid is that wherever you lived during the bulk of your life, that's who pays your retirement.
Well, there is that option. So either you can go into a private rented accommodation as a downsized property, so I imagine that might be a bedroom or 2-bedroom flat, or small house, bungalow, something like that. Or it is what they call not an assisted living, because that's a bit more of an emergency type issue.
It's a residence care home.
Residence care home, yes. It's not even necessarily what they call a care home, but it's a residence home.
Yes.
I've got family members that, again, perfectly able of mind and will, they live in these places because it's just cheaper to move to when you get to a certain age.
Yes, it is. And particularly when it comes to people with dementia and who cannot afford to live on their own and can't afford to hire a helper all the time, that's when the councils, who I think get directly centrally funded through some way, will be the ones where it goes through the councils.
I mean, we hear stories at the moment of councils basically cutting to the bone carer help, carer funding, sorry. But
it's individual carer funding.
Carer funding, as opposed to state funding for care homes and blah, blah, any kind of subsidy there could be. You know more about than me. Are there actually current government subsidies of care homes?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of money that comes through it. But that being said, the amount of money that a private residence pays for the same, or effectively the same service than a council hand, they pay like double what a private residence do. And if it wasn't for the private care home industry and people paying those, some might say over the top prices for it, there would be no care homes.
Wow.
It would just not be profitable. It would not be viable. The councils give money in, but they are definitely, the people who are being funded by the councils are effectively being funded by private residents.
Hang on, I don't mean to. I'm not going to go in too far on this, but it is kind of shitty when all you hear about is that families and particularly residents of these care homes are basically effectively giving up their houses to go into these places, and yet they are heavily subsidised by government funding at the same time.
Well, this is the thing. It's people that are funded. There's if you're you could be part funded, or you can be fully private, or you can be fully council funded effectively. But the people who are being fully council funded are being effectively subsidised by the people who happen to sell their homes.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Which is a sad situation, and I think it's and too right to whatever you think about the current administration. The fact that Boris did actually come out and say that this is going to be one of our top priorities, he may not do it, but at least he's saying it now, is completely the right thing, because it will take a few billion to fix this.
Going back to what we were talking about Hackney, the final scheme we mentioned for Hackney, which was the seaside and country thing, and you have to be over 60 to take part in that. I at least like the idea of it.
Yes.
It seems more fair than just under the radar telling, you've got 24 hours, do you want to take this offer of moving to here in fucking bumfuck Northamptonshire?
Well, that's something I think the 24-hour limit we didn't touch on, but to just...
we didn't, no.
Just to explain that, this is one of the reasons why 50% of the people reject the proposals from the councils, which is they say the councils that, I think this was particularly Brent's housing sort of nominated
Yeah,
councillor, said, well, private landlords need decisions quickly. It's like, I agree they need decisions quickly, but they don't need 24 hours.
They don't need 24 hours.
And you imagine you're in this situation.
It can take weeks to get a new private rent tenant.
Yeah, I mean, for imagine the situation where you've been waiting on this list for years at this point. You've probably got a couple of kids. You're sleeping on a sofa of somebody's in one living room, and then the council comes up and says, "We've got a house. It's 100 miles away. You have 24 hours to decide."
Fucking ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
It makes no sense, and I get it that these councils are under pressure. But fuck me, it's really playing with people's lives on an unfair, whether it be the tenants or the councils of these places they're moving to. It's just unfair.
Yeah.
But at least Hackney are doing something, I suppose, relatively positive just by being transparent and giving people the option.
And putting tailor-made schemes for people's situation.
Because they figured out a large part of their tenant population, which are old, because most people of a certain age from East London live in council housing because it was just a thing back in the 50s, 60s, you just got a council house. Back when the pressure on housing was just not as great, and there was a lot of prefabricated council housing just went up.
Yeah, and
in the post-war years.
And a lot of the people who would have either bought up their council house or moved out to Essex a lot of the time as well.
But they know these people, these old folk who they're primed for wanting to move to the Essex coast or to the countryside. It's like, okay, here's your option. You, instead of having to pay fuckloads of money to pay for a private a private sale, you can move to a council. You can shift you over to a smaller place out there.
Exactly, and then we can have more room for people with young families who.
Fucking makes me wish I had a council place in Hackney. So when I reach that age, I could just go off we pop.
Yeah,
and then off to Lowestoft or whatever.
Yeah,
actually, fuck Lowestoft's a shithole. I don't know, I'm trying to think somewhere nice. Rye.
Yeah.
Brighton, I don't know. But actually, to be fair to Lowestoft, in terms of East Anglia coastal towns, it's not that bad. It's just old. It's not Clacton, it's not Southend.
Yeah, well, I suppose if you're 65 and moving there, you'll think, oh, look at you'll be one of the young folks out there.
Yeah,
it's one of those things.
You've been to Lowestoft?
I don't think I have. No.
It's fun. Like, obviously, you've heard the stereotypes, right?
It's sort of a proper dilapidated town, isn't it?
It's a little bit dilapidated, but not as bad as you'd think, because you think coastal towns in East Anglia, and then you think, you think Southend, you think Clacton, you think, you name it, and actually it's not that bad, Lowestoft, but it's the greyest town you can ever think of in terms of the demographic. It's old.
Right.
It is old, and I have something in my mind tells me this might have something to do with schemes in London that might have existed before to swap people out.
Right.
But I don't think so. So it's probably just private. It sounds, I suppose, but it is a very demographically old borough town, Lowestoft.
No, that's I'll be honest, I love London to the bones, but I really don't want to grow up here. No. It's one of those things where I would rather grow up in a dying seaside town.
I'm literally on the verge now of getting the fuck out of here, because I as much as I love London, there's too many problems. And this goes for every major city on earth.
Yeah.
It's too big, it's too crowded, it's too grey, it's too concrete, it's too polluted. I want to live somewhere. I want to raise kids somewhere nice. I want trees and nice schools good schools. Sorry, trees and nice housing. And I want parks and fields and fucking meadows. You name it. I want all that fucking apple pie and whatever the fuck goes on in the countryside. I just want my kids to grow up somewhere nice and to live somewhere nice. I don't want to constantly, look out the back window and just see people walking down my alley to fucking smoke crack.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why our area in North East London is becoming a lot more popular, because it is especially areas of Redbridge like Wanstead, you can walk through there and think, this looks like any random village or small town in England.
Well, because Wanstead is a very nice... Wanstead is basically... It feels like a part of Leytonstone that happens to have been occupied by Redbridge.
Yeah.
And Redbridge somehow... it just somehow, what was talking about the market dictating, somehow it just attracted a lot of very wealthy people. And it's a very nice part of town. Once it is a very nice suburb. It's nice, artsy restaurants and nice bars, and it's got probably the best Wetherspoons you could ever go to.
Yeah, it's very upmarket Wetherspoons. It's very strange. But
I don't know if it's upmarket. It's just very good. It's just big, and it's just a nice big airy place, and it's just it defies the usual Wetherspoons.
Yeah. And it's right next to the station as well, which is very handy.
Yes. But closing thoughts on this whole topic, actually, something has to be done to stop counties. Sorry, I suppose the GOA to stop individual boroughs within the GOA dumping their tenants on these areas of southeast England and in the Midlands without, one, telling the authorities, and two, doing it without the tenant's permission. This is going to cause a lot of issues in the future, and it already is. I mean, we're starting to see a shortage of resources in places like Basildon, Harlow, Southend. Southend, we always say about how Southend is already a city. It's a city in its own right, mainly because it has its own infrastructure, it has its own suburbs, it has its own centre of the city, it has its own economy, and it has its own specific kind of geographic culture. It's based on its own place, but it's now gaining issues due to taking the overflow of tenants from London.
Yeah, and if they continue going down this road, then there will be those communities, and as we were talking about earlier, if they do continue going down the road of being the same ethnic communities, I think the resentment that's going to be bred in those communities is only going to get worse, and that's when you're going to start seeing people. It's going to start seeing people getting beaten up and all the things that we thought we left behind, as it were.
I mean, we saw stories coming out of the new towns a few years ago, the London new towns. So these were these 60s and 50s built towns that orbit London. They essentially were built for London overflow. They were built so people from inner London could have a nicer life in the suburbs, but yet still be able to reach London. They've got weird, those places, because they now live in their own weird universes where they don't have much contact with London.
Yeah.
And people there don't work in London anymore. They seem to have their own... I've got nothing against it. They seem to have their own trades based outside, based in those areas. Their whole world is based around these individual towns. But by that same token, these places don't have a whole lot of connections to London anymore. You still have people that commute, but... they don't. I suppose part of an economic level it makes no sense because it's still pretty expensive to get in from those places to London.
And I mean, it doesn't. There's already enough, sometimes justified and sometimes not, sort of London bashing, as it were. And I don't think the London boroughs are doing anybody any help for people in London who want to trying to buck the stereotype and this caricature that Londoners don't care about the rest of the country, but what the rest of the country thinks.
Yeah.
We do care about it, and we've got to sort of criticise our own councils when they do this sort of stuff to sort of show to the rest
because
of the country.
Because the councils are not the people. As much as I really don't want to sound like a Brexiteer on this, you've got faceless civil servants that are forcing a problem on places that are not London. They're talking about places that can't take this big influx, and this is not a fucking immigration or racial debate.
No, it's for people who are already here.
I mean, we're talking influx, a literal influx of people, whether they be white, black, brown. That they, these councils don't have the resources to pay with in Essex and within, particularly fucking Northamptonshire. Northamptonshire County, for anyone who doesn't know, last year was the first county in the UK, or at least in England, to go broke. It's bankrupt, and yet these boroughs are still moving desperately poor people to fucking Northamptonshire. Yeah, it's immoral.
I mean, what does that say about your confidence in your own borough that you're going to move people to a place that had literally gone broken a year ago? It really doesn't say much. It was like, we could do things for you, but instead these guys will sort you out who don't have a great record to begin with.
It's not even about Northamptonshire's great record, and that county council really does not have a great record. But away from spending, away from their own mismanagement of their own funds, they just got really crap funding. The East Midlands is somewhere that's really not paid any attention to.
Yeah, and this is a wider thing about how do you divvy out money from centralised funds, and particularly in education funding, this has been a big thing for a while, where a lot of the formula that they had been used since the Tony Blair era benefited inner cities because it was done on what's known as deprivation, most of the funding, but now with what's known as the national funding formula, a lot of those places are going to get less funding per pupils, or at least not accelerate at the same pace.
You do find odd when you consider that, we as Londoners think of the worst places in the UK being normally boroughs of London, but actually the deprivation of a lot of the big towns and cities of the East Midlands is fucking beyond belief. Leicester, Grimsby, Scunthorpe, I don't know much about Northampton, but I know that the borough of Northamptonshire has gone broke. Because I think the East Midlands is still one of these places where the London boroughs are really dumping these tenants. As we said, Northamptonshire, but I know they're also sending them up to Lincolnshire. They're sending them to Cambridgeshire, areas of Cambridgeshire that fall into the East Midlands, places like Peterborough, which again are really not particularly rich places. You think of Cambridge, you think of wealth. Peterborough and all that kind of North Cambridgeshire is pretty poor. Places where the local authorities just don't have the money to deal with it. No. And I hope this podcast, if anyone's listened, please fucking listen, helps bring this back to light and bring it to sort of, hopefully to more people who haven't thought about this in a long time, because, Brexit's taken up our fucking national consciousness.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that we really wanted to hammer home, sort of began and finished with.
In the long run, as important as our economy is, and the issues with dealing with red tape and with tariffs and with anything that's going to stifle trade in the near future, I think in the long run, this may be a bit more of an important issue.
If it continues going down this road and nobody fixes anything, it will end up becoming one of those things of how we only started talking about this now.
Because London grows on a year-by-year basis, and if you're constantly going to be taking an inflow of people, and every couple of years a load of 100,000 more people get dumped out, London's just acting as a sieve.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's not good for anyone, particularly the people that they're moving out. And it only benefits those people who work in those councils who need to get their figures slightly better so they can go to their managers and say, I've done my job. That's a terrible way of basing around public policy.
If there's anything actually, if there's any current campaigns going on, and I know there was some campaigns going on in Waltham Forest, but if there's any further and large campaigns going on in regards to stopping or maybe easing this situation, maybe convincing certain boroughs to do this the Hackney way, this kind of transparent route, please get in touch with us. We'd like to know.
Yeah.
I'd like to know. I'd happily, champion any cause that basically helps ease this issue. I think we're going to sign off for now. I hope this has been an entertaining episode, because I think it's just been a nice break from Brexit, particularly for our first official episode. Anything you'd like to say, Tom?
No, I think we covered it pretty comprehensively. Just to say that if there are any revelations about this, we will be covering them in future episodes.
Next week, on the second official episode, we're going to be going back to current events, so we don't know what we're going to be talking about yet.
No, because it's going to be a long week in British politics. You can already tell from the way that things are moving up.
Let's have a quick reminder of what's been coming up this week.
Well, you've obviously got the talk of the government of national unity and all the opposition parties jockeying for positions, with the Lib Dems and a lot of Tory Remainers not wanting to get behind Jeremy Corbyn.
Or Ken Clarke, for that matter.
Or Ken Clarke, no. And a lot of people, I can't imagine all Labour MPs are going to vote for Ken Clarke, especially if he's still got the Tory whip.
Yes.
It's, I don't think...
Do you know what, though? I could see, particularly with the moderates, I could see more Labour MPs voting for Ken Clarke than I could see Corbyn.
Oh, definitely. That's definitely a one. And you can see the Lib Dems voting for Ken Clarke every time as well.
Yes.
But it is a little bit ironic to sort of seeing for months and months and months the country had rightly been concentrating and criticising the Tory party for not being able to be unified, and then as soon as the focus is not on the Tory party, on somebody else, they can't be as unified as well. So it's not just the Tory party who can't be unified.
The idea of not going to this, but the idea of both Corbyn and McDonnell, as they've discussed, going to the monarch and giving this, saying we're taking over like it's a 1940s communist coup in Poland.
Yeah, two Republicans doing that as well.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
It's remarkable. So if anyone hasn't caught up over the last 2 weeks, Corbyn has gone to 2 different high offices within the British judiciary system and within Parliament to ask for basically automatic rights for Corbyn to take over a government of unity if Johnson is basically booted in a no confidence vote, and they've both said no. They're not backing it.
No,
it's not going to happen. But this is all for next week.
Yeah, bit of a preview.
We're gonna, whatever happens over the next week, we'll obviously discuss and have a good week. Please look into the issue we've discussed though, because away from being ultimately fascinating, it's a real issue. And please just put down your Brexit goggles for an hour and read into it and get involved if you can and if you like to. Adios from me.
All right, see you later.
Bye.